Welcome to EnergyRogue.com, the go-to source for the latest insights and analysis on the energy commodities market. Led by two industry veterans, Bill Shanahan and Brian Pieri, as they host their weekly commodity market recap. With over 55 years of combined experience in the energy sector, Bill and Brian bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the table. From trading and hedging to finance and optimization, they have seen it all and are here to break down the latest market trends and share their insights. So sit back, relax, and get ready to dive into the world of energy commodities with Bill and Brian on EnergyRogue.com.
So I've got a question for you, Bill.
Yes, sir.
55 years of combined energy experience a benefit, or is that a detriment?
Well, it depends if it's all in one person.
If you put your effort and concentration into playing to your potential to be the best that you can be, I don't care what the scoreboard says at the end of the game, in my book, we're going to be winners.
That is for the late, great Gene Hackman. Miss you.
Yes,
and
great actor.
All right. Yeah, fantastic actor. So today, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about nuclear war, but not the type that everybody thinks about, everybody talks about, not the type that is in the Terminator movies, which are great movies, by the way. I did not clip any Terminator stuff. That could have gotten very dark, though. So
well, we could probably end the show by saying, "I'll be back."
Yeah, we'll have to put that on next week. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about power, because there is a strong correlation between power growth, power development, and GDP, and a strong growth correlation with GDP and energy consumption. So these are two very interlinked processes. And hello, Mr. Doherty. Good to see you out there.
Hey, Robert.
So what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the growth on power. And I am going to show a few things. I do have a lot of slides here, I think. So we're going to dive in and talk about the global power demands for 2025 to 2035, the next 10 years. And the appetite for electricity is continuing to grow, and it's driven by four key factors: economic growth in developing countries, urbanization and electrification of new sectors, increased uptake of renewable energy sources. This is already happening in a lot of advanced economies. Expansion of digital technologies and electric vehicles. And so these are four key attributes. When I look at those four, which one do you think is the most important, Bill?
You know, I think in the developing countries is where we're going to see the biggest part of that. You know, there's been a lot of different studies, and basically what it is when a society gets to $5,000 per capita GDP, then their energy use goes off the chart, just straight up. And so you think about places like India. India only has $2,800 worth of per capita GDP, so they haven't even hit the growth curve yet.
Wow, that is. And speaking of India, we took a look at the 10 fastest growing. This only shows the top four, but we took a look at the top 10 fastest growing power demand countries. You have India, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Pakistan. And when you look at these, most focus economies on Asia, Africa, and electricity consumption exceeding 4 to 6% annually. And these are continued. They have been growing. Like when you referenced 2,800, I imagine if we went back 3 years ago, it was probably, what, 700? I mean, they're accelerating.
Yeah, it was significantly less. They're accelerating, but that acceleration takes place after $5,000. So that's why I
Yeah.
was thinking most of it. You already know my thoughts on renewables, and we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that when you look at renewables, when you look at fossil fuels with the rate of energy consumption, we need to look at both and implement those both across the globe. So I think the battle between fossil fuels and renewables is a fruitless effort by whoever entertains that. Fact is, we need both, and how we utilize both is what nobody is talking about. And that's actually what we focus on. So the top 10 fastest growing power demand countries, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Pakistan. These are the fastest from a percentage growth. Now let's look at the power demand growth by volume. Where is the biggest volume or contributors? Because that's a different lens than percentage growth. So when I started my career, I invested in a IRA. So every year that I added to my investment, I was doubling the amount that I had in the IRA. But as you accumulate over time, it means less and less and less. So when you look at percentage growth, it's a lot different than when you look at the volume of the power demand. And the 4 key areas to look at are China, India, Indonesia, and the United States. A lot of people miss this, right? I mean, we are growing at enormous rates. And for instance, when I look at, let's just look at the natural gas demand side for electric power. And what you'll notice is an interesting correlation. By the way, anybody that wants to dive into this is inside of Rogue Edge, which is $179 a month. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what you can see here is a consistent stair step up. These are weekly time frequencies. So you'll see that in the summer we are higher, and in the winter we have higher lows and higher highs. So we are stair stepping up. And when we look at this growth pattern, it is tremendous. And so that is alongside an expansive growth effort on renewables. So our natural gas consumption into electric power is already growing by a factor of 5 to 10% per year. And that is with added to renewables growth, which is supposedly eating in. So the countries to watch are China, India, Indonesia. Why would the United States be growing so much on power, Bill?
Well, they're growing so much on power is because of AI. That's going to be the biggest growth in our power sector because of artificial intelligence and the server farms that take to do that. So when you look at this, when you start looking at the populations of these 4 areas, China's still right at 1 billion. India's like, I think, at 1.2 billion. And Indonesia, I think, is like 700 million. I can't remember exactly on Indonesia. But the U.S. is 340 million people.
Right.
And so we have 1/3 the population, but we're using more power, and and everybody wants to use more power. It's not like they're going to say, oh, I want to live in my hut in the field. No one wants to do that. And so we're going to see that. And also remember that in energy growth, as opposed to electricity growth, that only about 40% to 45% of the energy that we use goes toward electricity. The other goes toward other manufacturing and industrial practices as well.
Wow. Well, and there is a whole wave of industrial growth that is actually going to be happening over the next 5 to 10 years. So key demand growth drivers. So we'll take a look at the fastest growth countries, primarily in Asia and say that 10 times fast. Sub-Saharan.
Yeah,
Africa.
10 times fast. Oh, no, Sub-Saharan. Yeah.
Clearly, I failed that mission. So
there is no tomorrow for
you. Well, mainly because I'm looking out here, folks. I'm out here in the middle of Texas, and I mean in the middle of nowhere. sort of reminds me of sub-Saharan Africa.
Well, and the electrification of rural areas and rapid GDP growth. So some of the largest volume growth is coming from China, India, and the United States. And these dominate vast population and industrial bases. And then the universal drivers are going to be electric vehicles, industrial manufacturing, which is coming back in a big way in the United States, renewable energy expansion, and that's going to drive demand across all countries. So these renewable pushes are on the opposite side of things now that there's been a change of political direction in the United States. So there's probably going to be a little bit more fossil fuel friendly legislation. I don't see that changing renewable energy expansion. However, I see it changing the pace at which we go towards renewable energy expansion. The pace is going to slow down significantly.
Well, the other side of that, Brian, and that is that you have to build the windmills and solars with fossil fuels right now. And so the expansion of renewables will actually increase the amount of fossil fuels burned.
Right. Yeah.
Just for the manufacturing process.
Well, I mean, that's actually one of the things that a lot of people miss is the amount of fossil fuels that it takes to develop the renewable resources. And the renewable expansion has a fossil fuel footprint. So does combustion vehicles. So does traditional oil and gas. Right. All of it has a fossil fuel footprint because energy is neither created nor destroyed. It just changes shape. Right?
Right.
I mean, that's a scientific.
Oh, here we go. We're now learning physics here all of a sudden.
Well, I mean, that is actually, it's about transformation. What is our quickest path and cheapest path to have electrification across India, across China, across developing nations in Africa? I mean, when we talk about Africa, Africa is a massive, massive underappreciated demand center growth engine for the next 50 years. We're not talking 10 years. We're talking for the next 50 years. That is where we are going to see massive expansions. So a lot of people miss that.
And nobody's getting fewer electrical devices. So nobody's ever getting fewer electrical devices.
I know. I have one screen here, a camera here. I have a cell phone, an iPad, all kinds of stuff. So energy sources for the fastest growing countries. Now, these are the countries that are growing so fast that they have to utilize energy sources for electricity that may be inefficient, may be costly, maybe not the desired environmental impact that they want to see. But when you look at it, coal is declining but still dominant in India as a power source. Solar, wind, those are developing slower. Hydro depends on where in India you're talking about. Nuclear, which is what we're going to talk about today, and then natural gas. And they're targeting 500 gigawatts of renewable capacity by 2030. I expect that number to actually drop significantly, mainly because when you start factoring in the raw economics of renewables, it becomes a little difficult to rationalize without subsidies, right?
Right. Right.
So Indonesia, very similar stack. You got coal, geothermal, hydropower, and solar. Vietnam, coal, hydropower, solar, and gas. Now, what you're seeing is the first variable mentioned is coal. And now, why would coal be the first variable of electricity expansion, Bill?
Okay, so first of all, it's the cost. So it's relatively cheap. It's easy to move. You can ship coal overseas, and that it has a very high density when you talk about energy. And so that's why coal is there. People get concerned about the scrubbers. You know, Brian, I heard a fact the other day is that I think this year or next year, China's total coal fleet will be cleaner than the US's total coal fleet because they have so many new coal plants that are much
Well,
more
because our
efficient
coal
and much
plants,
cleaner.
there hasn't been one
And,
in 30 years, right? A new coal plant.
well, I think we had one that was built sometime right after the turn of the century, and China's building about 300 a year.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. So the one that surprised me on this though, Brian, was Vietnam. I didn't even really, that's never hit our radar screen before.
Well, and again, this is on the fastest growing, so this is by percentage of change. But when you look at some of the manufacturing in Vietnam, they have expanded in a big kind of way, and it's growing. My brother has done some work over there. It's kind of interesting. Now, energy sources in high volume country. China, coal is still dominant, hydropower, solar, wind, nuclear, dramatic scaling of renewable capacity alongside nuclear. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And these stacks look very similar in the United States and Brazil and Japan. So when we look at the key observations of fuel sources, coal, natural gas, renewables, and hydropower are key components. However, the future considerations, we're going to see such a large scale decarbonization due to quote unquote clean energy, affordability, and emission reduction policies. These are changing right before our eyes. This presentation, if we delivered it a year ago today, would have had a much different metric. So when we look at these clean emission reduction policies, I will be clear. My opinion is that these emission policies need to be in place in some way, shape, or form, but they need to be rationally executed and rationally constructed, and that's part of the missing equation that we have in the I don't even want to call it bipartisan in the political discourse that is very unproductive. Let's call it that. Political discourse that's unproductive. Bill and I often disagree on a lot of policies, a lot of decisions, outlooks, and whatnot, but we have rational considerations. And what I'd say is 90% of what we talk about, we actually agree on, but we approach it differently. So, would you agree with that, Bill? You're supposed to say no.
So I think
You're supposed to say no.
I agree that we do. I know what I'm supposed to say. Part of the deal is that we never count the cost.
Yep.
The cost is not just in dollars; it's also in humans.
Right.
It's sort of like I told Brian a long time ago. I had a really great way to balance unity and kill everybody over 75. Then we don't have a problem. He thought, but I think it's the same thing here. Is that development companies say, "Hey, listen, we don't want you to burn fossil fuels, even though it's cheaper, even though it's more intense, even though it's more reliable. What you want to burn? My planet, I need to get growing." That's where we're going to run into these. That nobody wants a clean planet. Everybody wants clean air. Everybody wants fresh water. But sometimes it's going to be that, and sometimes and
So I'm gonna try and recap what you said, Bill, because there was some internet signal problems, but just based upon our previous communications and whatnot, what Bill is reframing the discussion around is, let's start from what the desired results are going to be. For instance, if there is a call for no more oil, that's fine. We can do that. However, what is the cost to that? If we reduced all our oil today, 1/3 of the global food supply disappears tomorrow. Like, as in 24 hours from now. And that's not a desired result. So, okay, well, we need to look at the balancing act between what are the trade-offs when we move to this. For instance, one of the renewables conversations are, well, if we want to move to renewables and get off fossil fuels for electricity generation, that is fine. However, we're not going to have power between the heat of the day for air conditioning during the heat of the summer. And that maybe that's a good trade-off. I don't know. These are the conversations that we have a hard time confronting as a society. So these are the conversations that need to happen when we're looking at the future energy considerations. So some of the nuclear discussion, Microsoft made waves with 3 Mile Island being restarted for data centers for AI. And part of this comes back to supply challenges. Where does nuclear supply come from? It comes from uranium, which is also used in nuclear weapons. So one of the things that we look at is there is a growing demand globally for nuclear supply. And now this offers stable, zero emissions power to complement intermittent renewables. So these are one of the things that I would say is that climate goals, from a climate goal, we should lean into nuclear as much as possible. Now the capacity needs, that the nuclear capacity for all this electricity consumption should double by 2050 for net zero targets. So do we have the uranium supply for that? Do we have the capability to expand to that? Some of the implementation hurdles, scaling up for nuclear supply chains, infrastructure, and workforce within 10 to 20 years faces significant constraints. So when we look at nuclear supply as an alternative to these other growth patterns on electricity, we have significant challenges in front of us. And these are not small, such as supply of uranium, such as workforce for nuclear power plants, such as safety considerations, because we can talk about 3 Mile Island, which is kind of a tricky one because there was a crisis there, as well as Chernobyl. There are safety considerations when we get into nuclear supply. These are important considerations and should be part of the discussion going forward. So expanding on the supply challenges, raw material dependence. I mean, the uranium is still a mined source. We actually get that from the earth. This gets back to the fundamental fact that energy is neither created nor destroyed. It just changes shape. So when we look at the raw material dependence, it must be mined, processed, and enriched. And we're going to talk about enriched in just a few. The mining investment gaps, there's suppressed uranium prices are discouraging investments in new mines. So when you look at a lot of these mines and you look at a uranium resource map, you'll see a lot in Canada and a lot in Australia. Not a lot in a lot of different places in the world, but a large concentration in Australia and Canada. Now, of course, Canada has good proximity to the United States, which is very power hungry, so that is very considerable. But Kazakhstan is another one. That's another area to look at. Enrichment limitations. This one is a key supply constraint point. It's dominated by a few countries. Infrastructure is inefficient for demand spikes. So there are three paths. Now I'm going to divert a little bit. So I'm Brian with Energy Rogue. My partner Bill with Energy Rogue is on the road. He's having some internet problems right now. But when we look at the energy markets as a whole, you can't look at coal without looking at natural gas. You can't look at natural gas without looking at crude oil. You can't look at crude oil without seeing diesel. You can't look at electricity without looking at all of it. So what we have done is we have created a subscription-based service with Rogue Radar, which is $89 a month, which gives you a convenient red light, green light for fundamental supply and demand on energy markets. And you can either spend 30 hours of research or you can invest into subscriptions that will tell you things about the market on what is actually happening. So Rogue Radar and Rogue Edge give you a complete arsenal. We have Rogue Radar, which is designed for a 5-minute read, delivering clear, actionable insights on energy markets. We have Rogue Edge, which has 150 interactive downloadable charts. As a matter of fact, that's the one that I was using as we were looking at the electricity power consumption over the last 5 or 6 years. That took just a minute or two. You can zoom in. You can spend all your time aggregating this information or spend your time analyzing what that means and what that means to your objectives. So Rogue Edge gives you access to all of those charts on supply, demand, imports, exports, storage, stocks. We give you weekly updates with expert insight, and we have a thriving Discord community, which is in 5 different continents. So if you are serious about the energy markets or you need to stay on top of the energy markets, Rogue Radar is your budget friendly at $89 a month. Rogue Edge is $179 a month. But with that $179, you're connecting with our expert energy staff from around the globe, as well as Bill and myself actually will weigh in on your thoughts. So stop wasting time and act now. So you can spend all your time 30 hours of research every single week diving in, or you can invest your money, get back your time so that you're evaluating trends in the marketplace, such as this one on electricity, where you can look at last year versus this year and actually develop some key insights into what is coming on the energy markets. So you'll stay ahead, gain an edge, and make confident decisions. So the choice is yours. You can leverage Rogue Radar, you can harness Rogue Energy, you can stay ahead, or you can wait for somebody to tell you what to do. So don't wait, seize the advantage. Today is the only day. So
there is no tomorrow for you.
That is important. So now back to nuclear. Nuclear infrastructure. And for those that are interested, there's links down below. You can subscribe or you can get our Energy Trader Toolkit. So click those in the link below. Also, drop us a comment. Let us know how we're doing. Nuclear infrastructure, some of the development challenges that we're talking about. Long lead times, construction timelines for large nuclear plants range from 7 to 10 years. Now, when we grow on electricity, Bill, do we have the time to wait 7 to 10 years? No. The answer is no. Wait 7 to 10.
So, Brian, I know I can't hear you. So,
can you hear me? No, I can't. I can't. And if I'm just going to keep talking, so you cut me off whenever you can hear me. So workforce shortages, decades of stagnant growth has led to declining expertise and capacity in many countries. The United States is included in that. High capital costs. Nuclear development of power plants are very costly, and they require a lot on safety. So Now let's look at some of the geopolitical and regulatory barriers. This one is shocking to me. How much of the enrichment, when we look at nuclear supply, we get uranium, but then we have to enrich it for utilization. Russia currently provides 40% of the global enrichment services, creating a geopolitical vulnerability. There's 7 to 10 years to build facilities, and we need at least 2 times the capacity to actually reach goals as far as emissions. So competition with renewables, nuclear energy, it can provide baseload power. However, this is what we developed Energy Rogue for. When we look at the hourly consumption here, let me take all of these data points off. Now, I'm going to bring these on and show them to you one by one. Nuclear is a base load. That is not a swing power. Okay. Our current power infrastructure in the United States, nuclear is either on or it's completely off. So there is not a swing amount. Now, coal, you'll notice, and bear in mind, these are hourly. These are hourly distributions of our electricity power demand in the United States. I mean, these are showing rapid, huge 90,000 megawatts. These are massive gaps just in the matter of a few hours. Now, that is with coal. Let's take a look at natural gas. When we look at natural gas, we've got similar hourly deltas. Now, these are approaching actually a max on how much they can swing on an hourly basis. So be careful about that. Now, let's look at solar and let's look at wind. Let's take off these and put this back on. Let's look at solar first. Well, what you'll notice is at nighttime, we don't have any, but during the daytime, we have a lot. This means that the nuclear power needs to solve something in between this for the nighttime. Okay, same can be said for wind. There are windy parts of the day and non-windy parts of the day. Now, the good thing is that it doesn't go to zero, but it does actually oscillate up and down. So, so wind is very important and solar is very important. But when you look at the delta between this hour and this hour, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. So within 6 hours, that means 80,000 megawatt hours need to be made up by other energy sources. So we have significant challenges with renewables growth. As we do that, we need to increase the amount of power that we can cycle up and cycle down. Nuclear is not set up for that. So here's some potential mitigation strategies for some of these risks. And again, these risks have to do with enrichment, the time to build, and the capacity that we need. Some of the potential mitigation strategies, we need to invest in uranium supply. That means investment into Canada, investment into Kazakhstan, investment into Australia. And I'm talking globally. I'm not talking about a US, I'm not talking about Russia, I'm not talking about China. I'm talking about investment as a globe needs to happen. Now, where and how, that gets into a different discussion point there. So we do have a message from Bill. A cow is blocking his signal. So Bill's going to be back next week. So investing in uranium supply is important. Accelerates SMRs, or small modular reactors. This one has the capability to change the game because now we're talking about smaller ones that can be manufactured and deployed in smaller applications. And that is very good because electricity dissipates as it is transmitted or transported. I'm going to use transported, but the transmission lines, if you go from Houston, Texas to New York, Natural gas, you may lose 5% of the molecule. If you go from Houston to New York on transmission lines, you're going to lose 95% of that transmission. So electric is very local. So that is another way that we can mitigate. Scale enrichment. We expand the capacity and diversify suppliers away from Russia. This will level the playing field as far as enrichment, develop the workforce, and streamline regulation. This is going to be important for where we end up on nuclear power installations. So where do we go from here? What are the considerations? Supply constraints, uranium supply shortfalls, and limitations in enrichment could restrict growth. Infrastructure hurdles, long construction times, and workforce shortages may slow deployment. Let me say that again. Infrastructure hurdles, long construction lead times, and workforce shortages may slow deployment. So that is, we need it quick. We need it very rapid, very quick. And renewable competition, faster, cheaper alternatives may reduce nuclear investment despite its decarbonization potential. What I would say is that we actually should be going back. Let me actually go here and build up one by one. So when we look at our power stack, it is not one supply source. This is the power stack in the United States on an hourly basis. This shows wind up here at this pink. Then you have water, which is this blue, naturally. Solar, which is orange. Oil, which hardly shows up on the map. This green is natural gas, and nuclear is this red, and coal is this blue. Now, one thing I would say is I started the energy industry in 1995. I was told by the year 2000, all coal consumption for power would be done. We still have roughly 15% in this blue part of the path, blue part of the, we still have 15% of our power stack is still contributed by coal. So there are economics at play. There are also cycle hourly distribution at play. So listen, I'm going to end with this. It's not fossil fuels. It's not renewables. It's how they blend together. And that's what we need to do. Nuclear is a big part of the global power shortage that is coming. And there will be a lot of interest around uranium and enrichment over the next 10 years. But it's not going to be around nuclear weapons. It's going to be around enrichment for nuclear power. So that is all the time that we have today. Drop us a comment down below. You can also reach out to us. Where is it? Rogue. Where are we? There we go. You could also reach out to us at rogue@energyrogue.com. We'll be happy to get back to you. We are not financial advisors. This is education only. So we do focus on the market a lot. And I will say, let's actually go back and take a quick look at the markets today. Power is driving natural gas up. And the reason power is because we are receiving less natural gas imports from Canada due to trade tariffs. That is a direct correlation. We are down about 2 BCF off 2 weeks ago. Another consideration is weather, of course. On the crude oil side of the equation, we have dropped below 66.84, which is a key point. So be watching that. And if you want to reach out to us for anything, rogue@energyrogue.com, Brian@energyrogue.com, or Bill@energyrogue.com. Drop us a like if you like this type of content, and drop us a comment. Let us know what your thoughts are. Where should we go on nuclear power for the next decade or the next 2 decades? So that's all we got time for today. Folks, thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.